Hello, everybody. I just rescued Claire from the Pine Needles Hotel. We had a miscommunication, all my fault, but it's nice to see everybody. I'm Tom Beto. I am a member of the board of the Holshouser Speaker Series. There's a couple of other board members here. Larry Cadell, who's also the Board of Trustees chairman here at the college. George Little, former forever chairman of the Board of Trustees. Kay Wiltz here. Where are you, Kay? Kay is the chair of the North Carolina Federation of Republican Women, so she's a big muckety-muck. Anybody else who's a board member that I'm not seeing? Very good. Well, welcome you all to our March meeting. We have another one in April I wanted to let you know about. It's April 30th, and we have Brent Bozell, who's the founder of the Media Research Center, coming. Media Research Center does a lot of work on, let me read their byline. MRC documents and combats the falsehoods and censorship of the news media, entertainment media, and big tech to defend and preserve America's founding principles and Judeo-Christian values. I think you'll find him very entertaining. April 30th, Tuesday, right here at the same time. Without further ado, let me introduce Clare Lopez. Clare is founder and president of Lopez Liberty, LLC, a mission to alert Americans to national security threats. She's going to probably scare the socks off of you this afternoon, but she's also very willing to take questions when she's finished. There are two mics in the aisles here, so please take advantage of that. Think of your questions in advance, and hopefully we'll have a great session and see you in about an hour, okay? Thank you. Claire.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for the introduction, the invitation, and for coming to get me over at the Pinehurst, I guess it's a golf resort, right? Thanks to all of you for not just being here, but waiting for me. I hope I haven't kept you waiting too long. But what I thought I would do is, cover a few topics here for maybe 35 minutes or something like that. Then we'll open it up to your questions. I see the mics there in the aisles. And I'm willing to, stay here as long as you have questions to ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them. What I'm going to do today is to return to a theme that I've spoken about before, and I call this America on or over the precipice. And the reason that I'm couching it that way is that I think and maybe you'll agree with me, we're at least on the precipice. We've taken our liberties for granted for way too long. We've forgotten what Thomas Jefferson once said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And I actually began my professional career under President Ronald Reagan. Yeah, that long ago. It was after grad school where I studied for my master's degree in international relations at the Maxwell School of Syracuse University. And, just like many companies, come to campus to interview, the CIA came to campus to interview. And our little subgroup, maybe there were, 10 or 12 of us in this group, was focused on Russia studies, international relations, but Russia studies, and we were all studying Russian. That was where I first began to study and learn Russian. And for whatever reason, I guess they liked me. And it's interesting because I interviewed with the State Department as well, and they apparently did not care for me too much. It's a very different psychological profile. The people that you want in the State Department, the people they wanted at the agency, very different I mean, I didn't realize it maybe at the time, but I do now. Different profile. So anyway, it was in 1980 under President Reagan that I began my career, my 20-year career at the agency. I was in the Russia division for 20 years, undercover, and got to do what I always wanted to do, and that was to serve all over the world. Literally since fourth grade. When I was 10 years old in fourth grade, I fell in love with my geography class and my geography book. And I was looking, I want to go there, I want to go there. And so travel and seeing the world was always something I wanted to do, and now I could do it, and I did. And so I began that career under President Ronald Reagan, who, as you know, eventually, brought about, or at least pushed, to the end of the evil empire, the Soviet Union. But here's something that Ronald Reagan said that has stuck with me all these years. He said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same, or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like once in the United States when men were free." I hope that day doesn't come, but he was prescient in talking about it. And again, I think that we are edging ever closer to that precipice, that place where we might hopefully not lose those precious liberties. But how have we gotten here? Well, we've allowed our institutions to be infiltrated over a period of decades by individuals whose loyalties are not to our foundational principles, the Constitution of the United States, the Founding Fathers. Unfortunately, Senator Joseph McCarthy left us way too soon, and the House on Un-American Activities Committee, and also then the one on the Senate side under Senator McCarthy, ended all too soon as well. These were the days in the 1950s when our leadership, including the FBI, if you can even imagine that, took communism actually seriously and went after it, hammer and tongs. But that ended way too soon and ushered in then what? The tumultuous chaos of the 1960s. Those kids from the campuses in the 1960s that took over, the admin buildings, the dean's offices, and all the rest, they're the ones now at the top of many of our institutions, academic and otherwise. We kind of pushed the snooze button, I would say, after the USSR fell apart, collapsed in 1991. You remember an author, a writer named Francis Fukuyama, perhaps, and he wrote a piece in the Foreign Affairs magazine, and he called it "The End of History." Well, nice, but no. It wasn't the end of history, and it wasn't the end of communism. It was the end or the breakup of the Soviet Union, yes, but the KGB, it broke up, you might say, into its constituent parts. First chief directorate is now called the SVR, which is the Foreign Intelligence Service, and the second chief directorate is now called the FSB, and that's the domestic service, but it's still the KGB. We still call it the KGB. So we forgot, that communism and other threats that then rose to the fore once again, like Islam, and other existential threats were still out there. The forces of Marxism and communism and Islam never did hit the snooze button, and here we are. Soon after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the Soviets took very methodical aim at our institutions here in the United States, especially and beginning with academia, our schools. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a book called The Naked Communist, maybe? Anybody? It was a few of you. It was written by a former FBI agent by the name of W. Cleon Skousen. And I don't know if he actually attended some of those committee hearings earlier in the 1950s, but he must have talked to people who did, you know, the House Un-American Activities Committee and Senator Joseph McCarthy's committee. He talked to people, obviously, who had been there, and from those conversations, he wrote the book, The Naked Communist. It was published in 1958, and the most important chapter, it's kind of a, you know, it's a hefty book, but if you just focus in on one chapter, it would be chapter 13, and the name of that chapter is called The 45 Goals of Communism Today, meaning 1958. I won't go through all 45, I promise, but the one that I really want to highlight here on this point is number 17. Number 17 says, get control of the schools, get control of the curriculum, get control of the teachers' associations. You think they got a check mark next to that one? I do too. You may have heard the phrase, the long march through the institutions, perhaps. That actual phrase was coined by a German communist named Rudi Dutschke in the 1960s, but the concept of it goes way back in the 1900s, earlier, to an Italian communist by the name of Antonio Gramsci. And he was arrested, and he actually died in an Italian prison in, I think, the 1930s. But his ideas were this long march through the institutions, cultural Marxism, in other words, not necessarily the tanks and the planes and the ships and the troops, you know, surging across borders, which they're still doing anyway, but the idea that you can infiltrate and co-opt and destroy a civilization like ours from within by infiltrating what I would call the pillars of our society. And I would argue that begins with academia, but then also includes things like your faith communities, government at every level, media. In those days, it would have been what they called motion pictures. Today, we've got, you know, TV, cable news, social media, the internet. But also, I would add entertainment, Hollywood, sports. Look at the NBA. I'm thinking of the NBA and the gazillions they do not want to give up making inside of communist China, even if those, you know, those lovely tennis shoes of theirs, those athletic shoes are actually made by slave labor. They don't care. And then finally, I would name Wall Street and industry. The Chinese Communist Party, you know, I think now is the leader of the international communist movement. Not that Russia doesn't, you know, still exist in the KGB. Absolutely, they do, and Putin, I mean, obviously with Ukraine. But the leadership, the overall leadership of the international communist movement, I think today is with Beijing. And so they have done that infiltration of all those institutions that I was just naming. So what happens back to academia when graduates of those programs that have been infiltrated like that, when they graduate and go on, they go on to leadership positions in all of these other institutions, but also academia, where they, some of them, you know, go right back and become professors for new generations of students to indoctrinate. And I think that's very much what we're looking at today on our campuses. All right, so what you know, we now call crony capitalism. Let's look at industry. Let's look at Wall Street and what's happened to it, right? Used to be called, I think the term was pretty common, crony capitalism, or maybe corporatism, another word for it. It's not fascism, exactly. It's not fascism. Without the Third Reich, there is no fascism. Without a nation state behind it, there is no fascism. And also there is not, as part of crony capitalism, there is not the Jew hatred intrinsic, you know, to fascism and the Nazi ideology. But the idea here, and we can see this everywhere, that private property ownership is in fact in a far too close collaboration with the state. Would you agree today? I think so. President Eisenhower, upon leaving office at the end of the 1950s, spoke about the military-industrial complex. Today, that would include all areas of communication, industry, including the military, transportation industry. And today, this alignment of all of these with the state, with the deep state, even if you want to call it that, it manages way too much of our main production of goods and services, and how we get our information, how we bank, how we travel, how we work. Way too close, the state and the industries in these areas. And what's happened is that, you know, a lot of this has become a tool of very invasive surveillance over our daily private lives. There's a case before the Supreme Court, I think it's like literally today, there were arguments. It's not been decided yet or ruled on, but that's what we're talking about. We'll see what they say. It might take a while, maybe. I mean, they said it could be quite a few weeks before that, maybe even months before that ruling comes down. But certainly, for example, there was a big trial run of this alignment, you know, between these different elements of society, institutions of society, and the state during the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak. It was never a pandemic, but we can call it an outbreak maybe. The lockdowns, the businesses and schools all closed, mandatory masks, the mandatory shots that force people to lose their jobs if they didn't want to take an experimental genetic therapy that has now killed millions across the world. And all of that overrode the individual doctor-patient relationship to dictate what medical treatment would be allowed or not allowed. Where are we? This is not at all what our founding fathers had in mind at all, and we've got to deal with this democratically, judicially, politically, or we're going to lose the republic. Now, we the people have also allowed ourselves to take our attention off of enemies of our constitutional republic, and I'm going to go through a few of these. Perhaps just kind of recently, maybe, we've been jolted awake by the events of 2020, 21, 22, 23, but the emergence of the Chinese Communist Party, People's Liberation Army, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, followed by a collaboration with the left. We sometimes call this the red-green axis, right? Red for communism, Marxism, green for Islam. But in any case, on the communist side, we saw the Chinese Communist Party literally aligning, and I'll tell you how, inside this country, with Antifa and with the Black Lives Matter movement. And along with that, we had the cancel culture, we had critical race theory in our schools, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion throughout government and industry. I mean, really having taken over a lot of that. But I would say there's some hopeful signs, and I promise you I'll end on some hopeful signs. So not to leave you all in the dumps as we finish up here, but at the time, what we're talking about is that this, you know, CRT and DEI and elemental peace stuff ran rampant, you know, through our society, our institutions, industry, business, everything. And then came the horrific atrocities of the Hamas Shabbat massacre against Israel that took place on October 7th of last year. And that was followed by an absolute explosion of Jew hatred that I never expected to see. Maybe some of you did, but I didn't expect to see it on the scale that we've been seeing it, the viciousness. But that was unleashed on our campuses, on our streets, organized and led, absolutely, by the Muslim Brotherhood, a jihadist organization. Hamas, you probably know, is the Gaza branch of the original Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And they have branches, they have front groups all over America, I mean hundreds, all over the country. And of course, front groups would include such as CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America, MPAC, Muslim Public Affairs Council, MAS, Muslim Americans. We could go on for a very long time, but I promise you I won't. Now, the immediate outcry and the steadfast expressed support for Israel after the Shabbat massacre and the Jewish people, to me, it was unbelievable how quickly that all ended, and how now we see through, I mean, it's information operations, it's narratives being spread by the Muslim Brotherhood, but we see, open statements by President Biden, by Senate leader Chuck Schumer, openly backing away from Israel, threatening to slow down our supply of ammunition and weapons to them. This was unthinkable. Although I have to say that some of the most knowledgeable commentators on the Israeli side, I don't know how many of you might know who Caroline Glick is. Maybe not. Okay, Caroline Glick is an American, born and raised in Chicago, but she made Aliyah to Israel quite a number of years ago and now lives with her husband and children in Israel. But she is a brilliant analyst. I mean, I really recommend looking her up. She has a podcast. It's called The Caroline Glick Show. She also writes very often for outlets like the Jerusalem Post, like, let's see, JNS, what is that, Jerusalem News Syndicate? Yeah, that's it, Jerusalem News Syndicate, and other outlets like that. Anyway, she was among those who predicted that that's what would happen. And I have one of my very dearest best friends is a rabbi in Massachusetts, and he too, he told me, just wait, he said, they're going to turn against Israel. They're going to turn against it. I know they couldn't. The atrocities were too horrible. They couldn't possibly, but they have. So there was a march or a rally in Washington, D.C., downtown Washington, D.C., in the middle of January, couple months ago. And it was called March for Gaza. That's the name of the website, actually, March4 Gaza.org, March4Gaza.org. And on the homepage, you see the main sponsors of the rally, and they're all, Muslim Brotherhood together with, some of the leftists, like the group called Answer, for example. But if you dug down into the website, you would come to a list of the sponsors, or at least the supporters, who are signatories to their support for Hamas. And I have to say again, I was taken aback. There are over 350 signatories to support for Hamas. This was in January again. There are who's who, basically, of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, some of those names I mentioned before, and also the communists in America. You know that Communist Party USA is still around, right? And there's Code Pink, there's Answer, there's Freedom Road Socialist Organization, there's World Workers' Party. These are communist organizations that exist and have membership throughout the United States. They're on that list of supporters for Hamas at that website. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the anti-Semitism, the raw Jew hatred erupting on campuses and our streets. Even FBI Director Christopher Wray, who's appeared now a number of times in hearings before Congress, has warned, again, multiple times, that in part because of what's going on over there with Israel's Operation Swords of Iron fight for its very existence, they're combined, although he doesn't say this, interesting, he doesn't make this point, but combined with our wide open southern border, he says, Ray says, that the lights are blinking red, quote unquote, in terms of the possibility for terror attacks inside the United States right now, putting those things together. Jihad is back. It absolutely is back. People wanted to forget that it was, still around, but it is. And I think that the best that we can do is going to be at the local level, to be aware of what's coming, aware of what's going on, and in any way possible to show support for local sheriff's departments, because those sheriffs, you probably know this, a sheriff is the most senior law enforcement official of a county, of every county in the United States. The authority of a sheriff supersedes federal authority in that county. But most importantly, a sheriff is elected by the people. And so that's why I'm not saying necessarily police departments, although yes, we need to look to them and rely on them as well. But I would look first, I think, to the sheriff's departments. You might know that for many years I was working with John Guandolo and the group called Understanding the Threat, and we briefed sheriff's departments and police departments all over the United States for years on these kinds of threats. But that's how I got to realize and understand, the importance of the sheriffs, because I don't think that the feds are going to be riding, to the rescue. The cavalry is not coming over the hill from Capitol Hill. It's just not. It wasn't in 2020, and it won't be now, this year. So I think that our defense, with whatever is going to be coming our way, will have to be at the local level. All right, let me talk very briefly about some of the international threats that have, as we've said, infiltrated inside of our society. I'm going to begin with what I think is number one, and that's China. And as I said, Beijing and the CCP have taken the lead, in my opinion, away from Moscow leadership of the international communist movement. They are taking dead aim today directly at the United States of America in an attempt to destroy this republic of ours. The CCP leadership, anything from Xi Jinping, throughout his top central committee and so forth, they speak pretty openly. It's honestly kind of amazing how openly, these rogue regimes will speak and tell us exactly what they think, exactly what they believe, and exactly what they intend to do to us. And it's not, just in that language, but it's often translated. I can recommend a few sites to you later if you'd like. But in any case, openly expressed, the goal of the CCP leadership is to seize global dominance. The Chinese leadership of the CCP thinks of themselves as the Ba. Ba is Mandarin for the hegemon, or they should be. They think that's their role. They ought to be the Ba of the entire world. They think that over the last, couple of centuries, that they were humiliated and taken down by Western colonial powers. And yes, that happened, the British, the Opium Wars. But they want that back. What they perceive to be their role, they call themselves the Middle Kingdom, meaning the middle of all the earth. They're the middle. And everyone else should be paying tribute to them, and they should be dominant. That's how they think. And so they want to replace the USA, the West, and our nation-state system, the Westphalian sovereign nation-state system. Putin does too. I mean, they're both globalists, Xi and Putin. To destroy that independent sovereign nation-state system with defensible borders. We could talk about our border too. Western-style liberal democracy, they've got no use for it whatsoever. Individual liberty, no way. People should be considered as part of a whole, as a group, a cog in a society. No individual liberties. This is how they think. And this coincides with the globalist agenda of the United Nations, Davos, the World Economic Forum, the WHO, and as I said, Putin and Xi. In May of 2019, and I found this online, it was translated into English, the Xinhua News Agency, which is an official mouthpiece of the CCP, published on the internet, openly declaring a people's war against the United States. Now, at the time, President Trump was in office, and everybody kind of took that threat to be, well, it's a trade war, and it's going to be sanctions and tit for tat, trade restrictions and that sort of. No, that's not what they meant at all. They mean now full spectrum warfare, unconventional warfare, hybrid warfare even. There's a book that you may have heard of. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. It's a paperback, and it's not all that thick. It's, maybe yay thick, 100 and something pages perhaps. And in the middle of it is a page with all the areas of warfare that they consider part of their arsenal, if you will, against us and the rest of the West and the world. And on that list of warfare, things we don't think of these things in terms of warfare per se, but diplomatic warfare, conventional military warfare, yes, trade warfare, psychological warfare, space warfare, oh yeah, biochemical warfare. Fentanyl, BW program, SARS-CoV-2, that's Chinese Communist Party warfare. That's what that is. Back in about 2003, I think it was, not long before he died, the then defense minister of the CCP, whose name was Chi Haoxian, gave a speech. And at the beginning, it was secret. I mean, it wasn't known. It wasn't published. But later on, it was. And good friend and superb analyst, by the way, Jeff Nyquist, posted the text in English of that speech, the secret speech of Chi Haoxian, on his blog site back in September of 2019. And I mention it because it is so, well, to me it's alarming. I think it would be to you too. In that speech, among many other things, it was quite a long speech, he made open reference to the murder of 100 to 200 million Americans. Yeah, he wrote that, said that, spoke that. To quote, and this was his quote, his words, "Clean up America." That's what he wrote. Clean up America, so the Chinese would have, and he used the German word, Lebensraum. Ever hear that word? Lebensraum. Hitler comes to mind, maybe? Lebensraum means living space. Like the Nazis needed the Sudetenland, and they needed Czechoslovakia at that time. For Germans, Lebensraum, living space. That's what Chi Haoxian, he actually used the German word in his speech. He talked about using biological warfare on a massive scale against us and the rest of the world, but even his own people, the Chinese people, of no importance to him or to the CCP. But, that was his warning to the West, and I wonder if, senior leadership in our national security even know who Chi Haoxian was, much less what he said. I wish they would. So in the end, though, all of this, whether it's the Soviet style, Bolshevik style, communist China, Maoist style, Marxism, it's not exactly and only from an economic point of view. Rather, communism and Marxism is for the complete totalitarian control of the masses by a privileged, tiny, but powerful elite. The abolition of private property, obviously. Where have we heard this before? You will own nothing and you'll be happy? You're going to eat bugs, too. Maybe not. Total dependence on a centralized authority so that the elite, the tiny elite in charge, can enjoy the good life on the backs of everyone else who are utterly subjugated. This comes, by the way, this use of this broad spectrum of different kinds of warfare, hybrid warfare among them. It comes out of an ancient Chinese military strategist by the name of Sun Tzu. You may have heard of him, perhaps. He wrote in some 500 and something BC, a book that's translated now into English, The Art of War. It's worth reading, Sun Tzu. And in there, he describes how to defeat the enemy without kinetic conflict. Remember what I said? before about no troops, tanks, ships, planes. China has not deployed any of that, really, in warfare against us. Yeah, they're building up their military strength, but they haven't deployed those against us. And yet, what are they doing? They're killing over 100,000 Americans every single year from opioids, in particular fentanyl. Do you know that number? Over 100,000 Americans are dying every single year because of opioids and overall, and fentanyl in particular, that's coming out of China. That's Sun Tzu. That is destroying your enemy without ever firing a shot. That's what they're doing. All right, let me just go very quickly through the military threat, the actual military threat coming from China. Qualitatively, they are not yet on a par with the United States or the Western powers, but they're rapidly advancing, and we're not. Let me interject here really quickly. I had a dear friend whom I got to know in about the last 10 years of his life. Wish I'd known him sooner. His name was Admiral James Ace, nickname Ace Lyons. And Ace Lyons retired as the commander of the Pacific Fleet when he finished his career. And I didn't get to meet him until quite a bit later. He died in, I think it was like 2019, if I'm not wrong. I think 2019, but we got to know him, many of us, and cherished, the relationship and now the memories. But Ace would talk about when he was commander of the Pacific Fleet, he had under his command I think it was over 360 surface vessels. Okay? China today, you know how many surface vessels, we're not counting the submarines, but surface vessels, you know how many China has now? Over 360. So Ace had that, 360, just the Pacific Fleet, not the fleet in the Mediterranean or any other fleet. We have several, Only the Pacific Fleet, he had over 360 vessels. China now overall has more than 360. You know how many in the U.S. Navy right now? Overall, the entire U.S. Navy, surface vessels, fewer than 300. I think it's around 290 right now. Total U.S. ships afloat. This doesn't work. What else they're working on? Advanced ballistic missiles, missile launchers, submarines, of course, nuclear warheads. They're building up their Navy, building at a much faster rate than we are. Areas like artificial intelligence, cyber technology, cyber warfare, space technology. Yeah, they are able to launch satellites into space and include satellite killers among the deployed assets military they have up in space right now. The Russians do too. I don't know if we do or not, but Elon Musk, where are you? What else? They are stealing a lot of this from us. Intellectual property theft is a big problem. There are over 300,000 Chinese students, typically of any usual year, in our schools. In particular, I'm talking about universities and graduate level. Over 300,000 on a annual basis. They're not studying underwater basket weaving. They are studying nuclear technology. They are studying cyber technology. They are studying quantum mechanics, that sort of thing. Some of them stay here, and yes, they are hired by American companies and they remain in the United States. But others go back home. And a note that we should mention maybe right here is that no matter where they are in the entire world, Chinese, whether they're students or businessmen or whatever they are, anywhere in the world, as long as they are Chinese, they are obligated by Chinese law to share anything that the Chinese security services, intelligence services want from them. So now think about that with over 300,000 students in some of our very top schools and departments. If, you know, the MSS, Ministry of State Security, comes knocking, they are obligated to give them anything they want, anything they ask for. That's including our intellectual property. Let's see. The relationship of the Chinese regime with Russia is worth making a note of here. It's kind of a tag team, and we might have thought that back in the beginning, you know, after Mao took over China in 1949, China was the junior partner back then, but no more, no more. China today is elder brother, and Russia is younger brother in that relationship. China is absolutely supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine, not with outright military, weapons, but with dual-use technology, things like that, that can be used by the Russians. And that relationship is part of even a larger axis of, I don't know, maybe call it axis of the rogues, including North Korea, of course, and Iran. I would put those four. You might add Venezuela, but the big four are Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Okay, let's look very briefly at what they call the Belt and Road Initiative. You ever hear of that? Belt and Road Initiative is a Chinese regime program to get their foot in places around the world, if you will. And so what they do is they offer to build out infrastructure in countries everywhere, roads, railroads, shipping companies and shipping ports, all kinds of things. And often with kind of poor, underdeveloped countries that need development, Africa, think of Latin America. Yeah, they're all over Latin America and the Caribbean. And then when those countries are not able to pay back the loans, the debt for the construction of that infrastructure, China seizes that, whatever it was, a road, a bridge, what have you, a port. And speaking of ports, what they call a string of pearls, meaning ports that they're establishing all over the world in very key locations. I'll name just a couple. There's a place called Gwadar, which is on the western coast of Pakistan, right at the entry to the Arabian Sea. That's one place. Another place they have a port is in Djibouti, on the Horn of Africa. You might know that the United States does not have its AFRICOM headquarters in Africa. We learned this during the Libya debacle. That headquarters is actually located in Stuttgart, Germany. But the one military base we do have in Africa, it's not AFRICOM, but it's a base, it's Djibouti, right on the Bab el-Mandeb, that narrow strait between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Well, right next door to ours, China put one of theirs. String of pearls, they call that. Okay, they're here, as I said. They're here as well in Western Hemisphere, Latin America, all over the Caribbean. Okay, inside the United States, I'm spending more time on China than I will any other country, just because it's such a diverse, such a broad, extensive threat. There's something called the United Front Work Department, which is under the authority of the Chinese Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And it is the propaganda, the information operations wing of the Chinese Communist Party. Works very closely, of course, with the MSS, Ministry of State Security. And I want to mention very quickly what they did. Back in 2020, you might remember that in the middle of the summer, like August of 2020, then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo closed down the Chinese consulate, well, one of them. They had 5. They closed down the one in Houston, Texas. And Mike Pompeo said it's because of intellectual property theft and, behavior unbecoming, that phrase, and espionage, right? But there was more to it. And I found this online. It's an amazing thing, the internet, what you can find. in translation from Radio Free Asia, was the explanation. What happened, remember that summer when our streets were, just blowing up, there were rioting and mayhem everywhere across our cities. Well, the Chinese sent an undercover unit of the PLA, People's Liberation Army, to that Houston consulate with a task to come up with a list of Americans that they thought would be susceptible to messaging about the rioting, about Antifa, about BLM. So they drew up the list, and then they were supposed to make videos, which they did, little videos, which they pushed out over, can anybody guess? TikTok, exactly. Pushed them out over TikTok to that list of Americans they'd drawn up. That was direct interference in the United States of America with an election year, a presidential election year, to amplify those riots on our streets. I think that's why Mike Pompeo closed the consulate. I don't know why he didn't say so. Yes, the other reasons are perfectly valid and true, but China still has 4 more consulates in the United States, besides that one in Houston now closed. There's one in New York. That's in addition to the UN mission. There's one in Chicago, one in Los Angeles, and one in San Francisco. And they're still open. They didn't close them down. So that's my take on that closing. On academia, we talked about that briefly, but you probably have heard the 1,000 Talents program, the Confucius Institutes on our university campuses. They're inside of all of our industry, commercial, trade, and economic. Because why? Because China has what people look at as a 1 point, I don't know what it is, 2 maybe billion person, as they see it, potential market. And nobody can pass that up. They can't, that's just too enticing for them. They will not pass it up. And so they get involved. They get involved in China. Now, I don't know if they know it ahead of time or not, but they certainly find out, businesses do once they get there, they can't repatriate their profits. They make profits inside of China. They can't repatriate that money to the United States. China won't let them, but they still make money. There was a very, startling to me, speech given a few years ago by an associate dean at the Chinese university called Renmin University in China. And his name is Di Dongshen. And this was all, it was videotaped. And it wasn't like it was somebody's cell phone, like an amateur, film. It looked professional, like they wanted this speech to be recorded and disseminated. And it was, and that's how we saw it. And by the time I saw it, they had, subtitles in English so that you could see what he was saying. And what he very directly said to this very appreciative audience at the university, that they had, here's the quote, he said, "We had our people set up here, or there, in the United States," is what he means, in Wall Street. You know who Peter Schweitzer is? The wonderful author. I'm just now beginning his new book called Blood Money. I just began it, but I think it's going to be a very revealing book. In any case, what Di Dongshen was saying is that the Communist Party had their people inside of our industry, inside of Wall Street, bought and paid for. Literally bought and paid for. And then he said, but, we just couldn't handle Donald Trump, so we had to get rid of him. That's what he said. All right, public health. I think we all probably know by now how deeply the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated United States public health, be it the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Health and Human Services, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, our university labs, they're inside of them. They're all deeply, deeply penetrated by Chinese operatives and spies connected to the massive, and it is massive, Chinese PLA offensive biological weapons program. They have a saying over there, they call it the civilian-military fusion, because those two, civilian and military, work seamlessly together. It doesn't have the division that we have here in the United States to the extent that we do. They very much are collaborating on the biological weapons program. We know that this has been going on since at least Mao's time. I don't know if you remember back in World War II, not remember, but you know about it. Not that anybody is that old. That there was a Japanese facility called Unit 732 that they established in Manchuria during World War II. And they carried out the most horrific BW development and experiments. For example, they dropped plague-infected fleas out of airplanes onto Chinese villages during the war. Well, you would think after the war is over, the Japanese are kicked out. That would be the end of it. But no. Mao comes to power in 1949. He picks up that BW program. He didn't abolish it. He picked it up and developed it together with the Soviet Union at the time, with Stalin, at least until '53, which is when Stalin died. And that was the beginning of the development of the Chinese offensive biological weapons program. And by now, you don't even want to know some of the stuff they're working on. But that's where SARS-CoV-2 comes from. It comes out of the Chinese biological weapons program. Yes, here's the problem. I'm talking about the penetration of our own institutions of public health, right? And what happened is that, in my opinion, the Chinese lured our public health officials, like a Fauci, like a Francis Collins at NIH, Rochelle Walensky at CDC, and so forth, lured them. Ralph Barrick out of, North Carolina, isn't it? Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's one of the leading biological warfare labs. He runs one of the leading ones in the United States. And you might know that during the administration of Barack Obama, even the Obama administration came to the conclusion that gain of function, improving the capabilities of a virus through genetic manipulation, that's what gain of function is in the laboratory. They came to the conclusion this was way too dangerous, and they banned it. They outright banned it in the Obama administration, gain of function. But there were ways around it. Ralph Barrick found ways around it. Anthony Fauci found ways around it. And they channeled money through an NGO called Eco Health Alliance, headquartered in New York. And from there, money went to China, in particular to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which, as you probably know, has many, many labs in it, but only one BSL-4. So labs, BW labs are categorized by their level of security. So at the lowest level, a BSL, Biological Safety Level 1, is kind of like your dentist's office. They take precautions, with hygiene and so forth. But then you go up the numbers, BSL 2, 3, 4. There's a BSL 4, that's the highest level, Biological Safety Level 4. There is one of those labs at the Wuhan Institute. They're like, 3 or 4 BSL 3s and a whole bunch of BSL 2s. But this is the one lab that we're interested in, just the one, inside of the Wuhan Institute, the BSL 4, which, by the way, the French built. And then, way back, this is like 2014, 15, 16, the French pulled out because they were alarmed at what they were seeing about what the Chinese were intending to do with that lab that they just built for them. And indeed, that's what happened. So Ralph Barrick in particular got around the Obama-era restrictions on gain of function, and he kind of farmed out the research to the BSL-4 lab inside of the Wuhan Institute. And we know this. English is great. I'm so glad it's my native language. Scientific papers are published in English most often. They may also be published in some other world language like French or Mandarin, but they're published in English, and they're online. And papers that are published about research studies have at the top a section right at the very top, underneath the title of the study, of the research. There's a whole bunch of names, and those are the authors or the researchers that participated in that study. So you know exactly who was involved in it. And at the very end of the papers, always they put who funded it. So we can go to look at some of these, and of course I have. What else are you going to do with all the spare time during the lockdowns? I read scientific papers. And we know that Ralph Barrick in particular farmed out some of the gain-of-function research, creating what is called chimeras. It's a word from Greek mythology. You know, you've got a, how does it go? I guess it's a lion with a man's head or something. That's a chimera. It's a melding of two different, animals. But in biology, a chimera is it's when you take a virus and merge together. You take things out of it, add things into the genomic sequence, and that's what they were doing with the SARS-CoV-2, with coronaviruses. And it's there. It's on the internet. It's published. So we know what they were doing. But I guess to the point, scientists kind of exist, scientists plus certain nation states plus the philanthropists. I would say those three together. They live in this kind of separate world. They think because they have so many letters after their names, they know way more than we do. Well, yeah, they do about certain things, but they don't think they have to share that with us or tell us about it or heaven knows, get our approval for any of this stuff. They live in their own little world. They sip champagne at Davos together. They're a clique. And they're up there, and we're all down here. That's how they think. Well, that's where SARS-CoV-2 came from. And who knows what else will be coming out of there. All right, let me move very quickly. Yeah, it's getting on here. A little bit about Iran. The #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, the Iranian regime right now. They train, arm, fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Hashd-e-Shaabi, those are those Shiite militias operating in Iraq and the former Syria. Fatah, the Palestinian Authority. They have established what they call a ring of fire around Israel. If you think of the geography to the north, you've got Hezbollah, Gaza is Hamas, and PIJ. PIJ is P-I-J, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The various militias like Al-Aqsa Brigade and so forth coming out of Judea and Samaria. That's all funded, armed, trained, and the Houthis, lobbing missiles and drones and rockets at international shipping in the area of the Gulf of Aden, the Bab el-Mandeb we mentioned before, between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, on up into the Red Sea. International shipping has absolutely taken a horrific hit. I mean, not just literally from the missiles, but I mean in terms of avoiding, that was a cut-through, to go through the Red Sea and eventually the Suez Canal and up to the Mediterranean or in the other direction. That was such a savings in terms of distance traveled from ancient times before the Suez Canal, when they had to go all the way down around the Horn of Africa and up the other side if they wanted to get, let's say, over to Asia, to India. Well, that's what they're having to do again because the insurance companies aren't insuring shipping companies that still want to travel through these areas that the Houthis keep lobbing bombs at, or missiles at. That's Iran. That's Iran. There was a ship, an Iranian vessel that sat in the Gulf of Aden for months, last year and even into the beginning of this year. It was called the Behshad. And it was providing the intelligence, the targeting intelligence for the Houthis on how to hit not just commercial shipping, but U.S. naval ships as well, and trying to reach Israel. Now, the United States, we did position U.S. naval assets, carriers in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, but this was what Iran is doing. We just heard, or I just read, and I have to follow up on this, but that the Houthis, these are primitive tribesmen trying to take over the entirety of Yemen, where they've been engaged in a civil war for many years already, but that they have recently acquired hypersonic cruise missiles. I have to follow up on that, but I just read that within the last day or two. That would be a game changer. This puts the Middle East ever closer to the precipice of all-out war. And then we talked about the Shabbat massacre. Let me go to Russia real quickly and then wrap it up so we can get to some of your questions. Russia, obviously, as led by Putin. Oh, did you know? He just won his election. What a surprise. And it was like with 120% of the vote, you know, just as always. But under him, he's been in power now for more than, 2 decades, coming up on, more than 20 years. Now that election now gives him another 6. Russia is neo-empirical, it's expansionist, it's globalist. Putin is seeking the reestablishment of what he considers lost glory of the Russian Empire and of the Soviet Union. You probably know that as a younger KGB agent back in 1991 when the USSR broke up, he called that the worst catastrophe of his life and set about his mission in life to reverse that. That's been his mission in life. We know this because he writes, he speaks, and it's all over the internet in English. Dmitry Medvedev, remember when they were trading seats for the president for a while there? Medvedev is now the number 2 guy at the Russian National Security Council. And he recently, like within just the last few days, he gave a speech. And he did not mince words. Again, it's translated, it's online. You might know the website called MEMRI, MEMRI, is Middle East Media Research Institute. And they translate a lot of foreign language speeches and sermons of imams and such. Well, this speech said very clearly, the objective of Russia is that Ukraine will no longer exist, that it will be obliterated and absorbed into a greater Russia. And he says very clearly that that's not where they're going to stop. Next will be the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and of course Poland. And they name these explicitly. Now you might know that a little country called Moldova sits on the western border of Ukraine, in between Ukraine and Romania. And the Russians already are using the same playbook. There's a slice of Moldova that sits right up against Ukraine, which is on the eastern side of a river called the Dniester. And so the strip is called Transdnistria. And the Russians have been trying to peel that off of Moldova for a long, long time. And they have soldiers in there. They have thousands of Russian soldiers in there right now trying to peel that off, just like they're trying to peel off the Donbass, the eastern slice of Ukraine, away from Ukraine. Keep an eye on Moldova. All right, let's come home very quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. The home front. I'm talking about especially our wide-open southern border. According to the most recent Census Bureau, 46 million people in the United States right now were not born here. Now, some of those are legal immigrants, and that's great. We like that. We like legal immigrants. Others are those who have come through illegally. There's been an absolute, as you know, of course, an explosion of illegal aliens pouring across our southern border ever since Biden took office, averaging, according to CBP, something in the range of over 8,500 per day. Per day. And that's the ones that they count because they come through ports of entry. You might know that recently under the Biden administration, they began using an app on the phone. By the way, we pay for the phones. They all get free cell phones. And that's along with those, those free debit cards. They all get those too. From NGOs, non-governmental organizations like Catholic Charities, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and others. But on the phones, they established an app, and the app is called CBP-1, Customs Border Protection 1 ONE. And all the illegals have to do is go on the app, make an appointment with an asylum hearing judge in the United States, and when they come through the port of entry, they just show that, I've got my appointment, and they get waved straight in. I was on the border last August, and I was in Eagle Pass, And that's right across the bridge from Piedras Negras in Mexico. And as these people were coming across, the big white buses, I don't know if you've seen these things, big white buses, no lettering on them or names or anything, but they're waiting to pick them all up. The buses are just waiting right there on the bridge. They cross over the bridge, here's my app, and they climb on the bus, and then they go wherever they want to go, and we're paying for that, of course. So what I was going to say is that because so many have been drawn to the ports of entry now using that app, in between ports of entry, where more used to come flooding across, the border agents have been pulled off the line, as it were, to do processing at the ports of entry. Paperwork, admin, paperwork. And so huge expanses in between the ports of entry are wide open. And that's where what they call the gotaways come through, the ones that don't really want to come through a CBP app or, come up with a CBP agent. By the way, you ever hear of Chinese jungle tigers? Jungle tigers are kind of the nickname of a battalion of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. And we know about this especially from the reporting of Michael Yan, Y-O-N, whom I know. Never met him in person, but we're in contact. He spent a lot of time down at the Darien Gap that sits between Colombia and Panama, that rugged jungle passage they have to get through. And when he was there, he was talking to the villagers on the Panamanian side, and they would see people coming out of the jungle, and they're like, phew, we made it, we made it. It's really rough, a lot of people die in there. And they would see lots and lots of Chinese men, young, fit, military-aged Chinese men coming through. And the Chinese men, according to the villagers, they went and got chickens, and they killed the chickens and drank shots of their blood. Yeah, I know, it's gross. And Michael didn't know what this was, but we both know Dr. Li Mengyan, whom you might recognize the name as a virologist who escaped out of Hong Kong back in 2020 as a whistleblower about the Chinese biological weapons program and the SARS-CoV-2 virus in particular. So we thought, let's ask her. And so he did. And she told him, oh, yes, that is the signature, the blood thing, training ritual of the Jungle Tigers, a battalion of the People's Liberation Army. No, they're not coming through ports of entry. They're not using their CBP-1 app. They climb on the buses too, and they come up, and at some point, they're coming through in between ports of entry. So just a little fun fact there. Now, oh yeah, well, what's happening most recently? The chaos in Haiti. I'm sure you've all seen that. What happened is that some criminal gangs, which are absolutely vicious and powerful in Haiti, stormed a number of prisons a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I guess, and they freed thousands of prisoners, really the worst of the worst, out of these prisons, and they're gang members, and they've all linked up now, and they're running riot across Haiti. Haiti, as you probably know, sits on the island of Hispaniola, shares that island with another country called the Dominican Republic. I'm sure that border is tightly closed. It's like geographically right south of Cuba is where it's located in the Caribbean. But these gang members are now running rampant all over the country, in particular the capital, Port-au-Prince. And the head gang member, or gang leader of all of these, is a guy who goes by the nickname Barbecue. You heard this? Barbecue. I forget his actual name, but he's known as Barbecue. And the reason is because when he kills his enemies, they're shot dead or they're macheted or whatever they do to them. They're dead. Bodies lying all over the streets, by the way. He carves them up, barbecues them, and eats them. There's cannibalism going on in Haiti. Now, I can hardly blame the Haitian people for wanting to escape that. But what that means is that boatloads are headed our way. And you may have heard Florida Governor Ron DeSantis talking about having intercepted last week, I think it was, a boat the first of maybe many to come, I don't know, carrying about 25 Haitians, illegals, and on board were both weapons and drugs. That's the leading edge of what's headed our way. And just to top it all off, the Biden administration, I think it was through an executive order, about a year ago, I think during 2023, established a special entry category for Haitians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and I think there was one more that I forget, that they would be allowed to come into the United States, 30,000 a month, with no checks, no background, vetting, or, I mean, why would you do that, right? So that's what's headed our way. That's what's coming this way. Ron DeSantis has pledged to try to do his best to keep the borders of Florida, secure and safe, but if the numbers get overwhelming, we'll have to watch that. Okay, what do we need to do about all of this? I promise not to leave you in the dumps. So, number one, I follow a friend, a longtime friend of David Goldman, who is a marvelous financial expert, demographic expert, in particular of the Far East of China. And going back to academia, which is one of the things we talked about first, he says we can't fight something with nothing. A lot more of our students, beginning in, I don't know, grade school, high school, have got to be taking up STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, not, gender studies or whatever they're majoring in these days. That's not going to get us leadership, not going to secure our leadership of the free world. So he is absolutely pounding the drum on that we've got to reinvigorate our academic studies towards STEM subjects. We have to make up our minds, and I know that candidates running now have talked about this, to reestablish U.S. leadership of the free world together with like-minded partners around the world. We have to restore credibility to them, that we are a reliable partner ourselves, which I'm not so sure we are looked at that way at the moment. This means Israel, it means Taiwan, it means Ukraine, it means NATO, and more. We have to restore our military. I talked to you about Ace Lions and our Navy, but across the board, Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force now too. We have to reestablish credible military deterrence against would-be aggressors, neo-emperors, warlords like Putin, and return to a defense of the Westphalian sovereign nation-state system. We need to pay for this, of course, and the way we do that is to revive U.S. energy production here at home. We've got more oil, gas, and coal reserves than any other country on the face of the earth, and that includes Saudi Arabia and it includes Russia. We have more than any one of those. Restore our energy production, domination, energy independence and domination. Return to our foundational principles, enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, end the erosion of those rights, beginning with the First Amendment from within our very government. End the censorship industry that's been established, run up by the government, the military. Democracy is not an elite establishment and institutions, it's us, it's we the people. As George Washington told us, if freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Let me finish with some thoughts from General Mike Flynn, who is a tremendous patriot. I've known him for years. But he talks about this often. He's got different social media sites, and he speaks often. What do they call it? The America Tour, or America First Tour? Reawaken America, thank you, that goes around the United States. It's fantastic. I spoke at one of them during, I think, 2022. But here's what he says, basically. He says, if we don't recommit this nation and our military to what is right and good, what is fundamental to the defense of this republic, get ourselves ready once again to fight and win against the enemies that would destroy us, America on the precipice will be America over the precipice. And then Mike Flynn, also quotes Abraham Lincoln, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. Finally, know that we who hold Judeo-Christian Western values will win in the end because our moral ethos is superior to that of either Islam or Marxism. Human beings don't want to be crushed under tyranny and eventually will always rise up against barbarism and savagery and the crushing of the human spirit. Let me thank you very much, and I will be very happy to take whatever questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your sounding the alarm and your remarks and your service. Our intelligence community is supposed to proactively keep us safe.
Yeah.
But we have found that they're surveilling our own society. And we have people such as James Clapper and John Brennan, and perhaps even our current FBI director. So my question, because of your background in the intelligence community, I mean, this is inside.
Yeah.
They're destroying our own people, our own entities are destroying our country. What is the answer to that? I mean, plus you had the other 49 so-called intelligence experts that said that the Hunter Biden letter,
In that letter, yeah.
was Russian
Disinformation.
propaganda, disinformation.
Well, I think what has to happen, number one, is new leadership at the top, and that means that these elections coming up on November the 5th are, and we've heard this before, the most important, most critical elections probably in our lifetime. And then with that new leadership at the top, and I would include in Congress too, there's a lot of house cleaning needed there as well. Then some changes in appointments, because that's where you begin. You begin at the top with appointments to Director of, FBI, CIA, and all the rest, the cabinet. You begin there. And they then have to do the house cleaning within their own establishment, their own institutions. And, on the campaign trail as we go forward this year, whatever town halls there may be or opportunities to question or even challenge some of these candidates, put them on the spot if you can attend any of these. Do you intend to clean house at our national intelligence agencies? Do you intend, to stop the weaponization of our judicial system? There's cases right now in front of the Supreme Court. The one out of Missouri is about free speech, and the ones that involve some of the journalists, like, what was his name, Matt Taibbi, and, Schellenberger, and a few more, that's coming up before the Supreme Court. Now, we can hope at the Supreme Court, but whatever new leadership we can get in there this year is absolutely critical. That's where I think it starts. But I would also say that at the local level, it matters too. And I'm talking about elections, right down in the county level. I mentioned sheriffs before. Nothing more important than the sheriffs you elect. Their departments, they're the ones who are going to be out there on the streets when the streets blow up this year. They're the ones who are going to be out there protecting us. As I said, the cavalry is not coming over the hill from the feds. They didn't come in 2020, and they're not coming in 2024. It will be our local law enforcement. So election of sheriffs and their departments matters a lot. And don't forget, other local institutions. School board, Look what parents are doing across the country with school boards. Library boards. You never maybe have thought about library boards before, but that's where they bring all these hairy creatures in to tell stories to little toddlers, right? That matters. Who's on your library board? It matters a lot. So don't neglect your local down ticket races. It's really important. Okay, next one here.
Hi, Claire. Ken Benway. How you doing?
Hey, Ken, it's good to see you. I'm
welcome
sorry,
back.
couldn't see Marianne, but thanks
Yeah.
for coming.
Welcome back. Just to our north in Randolph County, we have an outfit called VinFast, a Vietnamese company. They build automobiles. They're building a large battery.
Electric vehicle plant.
Yeah. I suspect they're beholden to a degree to the Vietnamese Communist Party back at home. To what degree, I'm not sure. But the Vietnamese and the Chinese don't typically get along. However, they do share a common bond in international communism. I find it interesting that we've got a footprint that big just north of here. And when you mentioned the pearl in the necklace, that's the first thing that popped into my mind.
Sure.
We have a pearl overwatching Fort Bragg, Camp McCall, Camp Lejeune, and Research Triangle Park. What's your sensing of that kind of a situation?
Well, I heard, you may have heard also, former President Trump was speaking in, where was he? Was it Ohio? Just recently, the most recent speech campaign speech he just gave. Ohio. It was Ohio, yeah. Dayton, I think, right? And he was talking about EV plants being built in Mexico, so to the south of our border. And all the parts, all the batteries, all the components of the batteries coming into Mexico from China. And then Mexico would think about, they want to export those into our country and destroy our existing, gas-powered automobile industry. And what Trump said is that, on day one, that stops. On day one, if they want to export EVs into America, he's going to put a 100% tariff on every one of them and protect our automobile industry here at home. And from north or south, I think that's what has to happen. Something else we need to pay attention to in terms of coming, supply chain out of China are chips, which go into everything from cars to our military, technology, everything, our cell phones, everything. Taiwan especially, what is it called, TMSC, the company in Taiwan that is responsible for over 90% of the world's highest end, the most sophisticated chips. Other chips elsewhere, yeah, but the highest end ones, the most technologically advanced ones, come out of the company called TMSC in Taiwan. If we allow China to take Taiwan, I don't know what's going to happen to that chip supply, without which our automobile industry ends, our jet fighters, everything in our military ends, because we're not making the chips locally. We're starting to build some new plants, as I understand it. But, we're playing catch-up at this point. So from either of those, on the EV side, the chip side, other things too. Pharmaceuticals. Over 90% of our pharmaceuticals, or the components that go into them, where are they made? China. Yeah. So, people who depend on pharmaceuticals for, heart ailments or diabetes or, just about anything, antibiotics. China. We've got to repatriate our industry with whatever incentives, tax incentives, or whatever that takes to bring that industry home again. We've got to do that on a crash basis. So, excellent question, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks.
Long time to stand. What I'm concerned about, and you've mentioned it, that this is a different kind of war from the Chinese. I've talked to active military at Fort Bragg, and they don't see us as having any problems because they don't see any missiles, planes, tanks, etc. And
They don't see it?
They laughed at me when I said there was a concern. And what I'm concerned about is this current administration hasn't been able to get any bills through regarding immigration and the border. But they had our representative, our American representative to the United Nations, sign on to Agenda 2030. I don't know if that was September of last year here in America. And that is very organized, and that's why why immigration has increased. They land in Quito, Ecuador, where there's no, and the Chinese do. They come through the gorge that you're talking about.
Yeah, they go to Ecuador, by the way, because Ecuador doesn't require a visa. They don't need a visa to fly into Quito. I've been in Quito. It's gorgeous.
And then
No
if
visa.
they can get through the gorge, then the first way stop, which is organized like the military, all the way through Central America with cots and water and food, and we have
Clothing, shoes, backpacks, debit cards. Those debit cards, they get reloaded with hundreds of dollars every single month for these illegals, even after they're in the United States.
And who is it? The Red Cross is giving them maps as to where they
Yeah,
can get.
the United Nations is handing
how
out
they get
maps.
through.
And the NGOs. Here's your routes.
Doctors
This is how you go.
Without Borders, whatever it's called, Doctors Without Borders, they give them pills. If they were raped, they can get rid of the pregnancy.
I mean, they themselves suffer at least as much as Americans are going to be suffering.
Yeah, and then let's see. UNICEF gives them the children clothing, but it's basically military-age young men.
Yeah.
And and I saw a tape on YouTube, and there were whole plane loads of Chinese, whole plane loads of whatever, and then they're told exactly where to go to the next way station.
Yep.
And they end up supposedly in Laredo, Texas. And
Well, not just there.
this is like a Trojan horse.
Then
Our
you might
military
have
doesn't
you
see
might
it
have
as a
seen,
problem.
right? Just recently revealed by Todd Bensman, who's a wonderful reporter. You might know his name. He's also a fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, CIS. I know Todd, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to get to lecture his class at the University of Texas in another few weeks. But he broke the story about these flights that are coming directly from we don't know where, direct flights into United States airports. They won't tell us which airports, from where the passengers are coming, or to which communities, airports, they're flying them. Over 320,000 during the Biden administration so far.
Right. Now, the other thing that we couldn't do anything with Congress was the guns and gun control and so forth. This last 2 weeks in Geneva, Switzerland, the United Nations is having a meeting on registering all ammunition.
Yeah. Did you want to ask
in other words,
did you want to ask a question about those things?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your question?
Well, the question is this true, and is there any
all
way
of
to
that.
stop
Yeah.
it?
Yes, all of that is true. And I would add that a president does not need any additional legislation passed in Congress, because when President Trump was in office, he didn't need legislation or bills to close the border. He negotiated directly with presidents of Mexico and Central American countries. He threatened very high tariffs if they didn't get their act together. That's a canard. That's a false false lead to say that they need to pass some additional legislation in Congress. But even if you did, the first bill passed in this congressional session by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives is called H.R. 2. And it's a bill about how to close the southern border. In other words, restore, remain in Mexico, detain and deport by ICE, and other measures that include repatriation down to their countries of origin, wherever that may be, using DNA testing at the border. You know they don't even DNA test anymore? When adults come in, like men, and they've got little kids in tow. Under President Trump, they did DNA testing to see if those were really family members or not. On the spot, they did DNA testing. Last year, May 31st of 2023, Biden ended that program. So now, nobody knows to whom these little kids belong, really. And very often, they do not belong to the men that are trafficking them into the United States. And I do mean trafficking. Trafficking into sex slavery, trafficking into indentured servitude, labor. Kids have been found in the middle of the night in meat-packing plants and other kinds of labor that they never should have, been at. Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, up before Congress, asked about the kids that under Health and Human Services responsibility led into the United States, and apparently they've lost like 86,000 of them. They have no idea where they're at. And Becerra is about as arrogant as the day is long, just like Alejandro Mayorkas, a smirk on their faces. These kids, the United States today is the #1 trafficker of children in the world. That's what we've become. You think this election matters? Yeah. Well, thank you for those comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we need to vote in good people to go to DC. I mean, that's one of the strategies, right? Well, the way the system's set up and the way Congress inside of DC has become, it's infected in its own. Even if a new person goes in, they on their own can't fight that. They're either going to come home real quickly.
No, they need to make common cause with others,
Right.
likewise just elected to Congress, maybe.
Right. So I just wondered
With the same
what is your comment
worldview.
on the Convention of States we're trying to get
Oh,
passed?
good
so
grief,
that
no.
38.
That's the last thing on earth we want to allow, the Convention of States. Good question, very good question. We've got a Constitution. If they don't obey the Constitution we have now, what faith, what trust do we have that any new one is going to be obeyed any better? And who knows what will go into it? Because although the states under the Constitution call a convention of the states, they're not the ones who staff it. Congress does. Current Congress does. And believe me, there's no Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington, Ben Franklin that I know of in Congress today, although there are some very good people. But you remember the last time that Americans took, the Articles of Confederation, right? Before and during the Revolutionary War. That's what our legal system was, the Articles of Confederation. And, as the war ended and we won in 1783, the winner, the ones who won, our founding fathers, convened a constitutional convention. And what happened? What happened at that convention? They completely threw out, lock, stock, and barrel, threw it out, the Articles of Confederation. It was gone, finished, wastebasket. And we are only lucky that in those days, the ones attending the Constitutional Convention, which finally concluded in 1789, we can only be thankful that it was George Washington, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and the rest. Do we have those people today? I wouldn't trust the ones up there now, for and I could throw them. I absolutely think that a convention of the states is the wrong way to go. Completely just no, absolutely not.
Well, I mean, how do you explain that we the people is how our country started? You know, it was we the people, us right here, got together and decided how it would work. The Convention of States offers that. The 38 states have to agree, 38, and that's still what's written in our Constitution. It hasn't changed.
Not opening that doorway, not even giving them a chance to open that doorway.
Well, I've read the history on it from front to back, and I'd invite you to do the same. So
I do
thank
not
you.
trust the ones who would be entrusted with an Article 5 Convention of the States. I don't trust them today. We're very lucky, like I said, way back then, that we had, you know, the founding fathers that we had. We don't have them today. I mean, certain really exceptional exceptions, that's true. But overall, no. Sir.
I wonder if you would comment on the establishment of these Chinese labs
Oh, yeah.
in the country, in our country, their own police forces, which they've set up, and
Yeah.
Justice Department just leaves them alone.
Right, so I didn't go into all of these details, but they're well worth naming or mentioning, thank you. In addition to the 4 remaining consulates that China has in this country, as I named the places, there is an embassy, of course, in Washington, D.C., there's a UN mission in New York, and, as the gentleman just noted, there are these, I don't even know how many, 5, 6, 7, special police stations that have been identified now around the country. They have no diplomatic standing or authority whatsoever. It's thought that they're used to intimidate and harass Chinese nationals in this country to either pipe down and not speak out as dissidents against the CCP, and or even to coerce them to go back home because they have relatives back home in China that are being threatened. And if they don't go home, you know, what's going to happen to their family members? So that's the police stations. Now, in addition to those, there's another set of special stations they called special service stations, in English anyway, with absolute, both of these, ties to the MSS, the Ministry of State Security in China. And I'm not even quite sure what the special service stations are for, except maybe more harassment and intimidation of Chinese nationals in the country. Honestly, I'm not sure what their purpose is distinct from the police stations, but none of those has diplomatic authority. I don't know why they're not closed down, really. And if anybody is in a place, a city, where one of these is located, you might want to bring it to the attention of whatever elected authorities you can find. Oh, and the labs, yeah. Thanks, Kay. Back in, was it February of this year, I think, maybe January, in a place called, it was, Redding, California, I think is the name of the place, small town, was discovered in an old, decrepit, falling down warehouse, a lab, a biological lab. And in it were all kinds of empty jars and vials which had labels on them with the names of, you know, horrific pathogens like Ebola, but nothing in them. And then around 1,000 mice, most of which were dead or dying because they hadn't been cared for. And it was only kind of by chance that this place was discovered by an alert, I don't know, state of California official. I forget what her department was, but she was in the place where this warehouse is, and she noticed a pipe, or a hose, I guess I should say, coming out of the building, out of a window or something. And that alerted her to go check and look into it, and she found this lab, which was just a wreck, a complete decrepit mess with stuff strewn all over the place. They, as far as I know, did not identify any actual pathogens then at the time inside that building. Just those jars and those vials with labels on them that might or might not have held something at one time. Don't know. But when they looked into the ownership of this place, they found connections back to China, back to the Chinese Communist Party. And so, yeah, of course it was closed down, and everybody's worrying, well, are there any more of those? Are there any more, you know, around about the country? This one obviously was not a professional laboratory. As I said again, it was a decrepit mess. And they probably would not have been able to actually threaten anybody with anything coming out of there, but who knows with the sloppy protocols, the sloppy safety protocols that were evident in what they found, all, you know, strewn about the floor, the tables, and so forth, you know, who knows? So the story kind of went away rather quickly, but not sure yet, even now, what that place really was, but it shut down. Okay.
Over 15 months ago here in Moore County, we experienced a power station attack.
Yeah.
And I know that you are experienced in the EMP field, so perhaps you could just briefly comment on that threat.
So what Kay is talking about is an attack that took place on a, I guess it was a substation here in Moore County. Pardon? You guys all live through it. You live here. This is Moore County. And that was not the first attack like that on a substation. You can go back 10 years to 2014, out in California in San Jose, there was an electric substation called the Metcalf Station. And what happened, and nobody observed it at the time it happened, but only on I guess, night camera footage, video footage afterwards, after the fact. But a number of assailants with automatic rifles, and this is on the cameras, shot up the cooling containers at the substation. Now, you might know that the fluid in those cooling tanks are extremely necessary to avoid a catastrophic meltdown, failure of that substation, which then, you know, could cascade on down to anything else it was connected to, and in this case, in San Jose, connected to Silicon Valley. But what these assailants did, and again, it's on camera, before they started the attack, they lifted, opened some covers to telephone communications lines underground, and they snipped them, and they thought they were cutting them down so that no warning could get to anybody else to shut down in time to avoid catastrophe. But they missed, I don't know, one or two of the telephone lines, and that allowed downstream, as it were, to take precautions and shut things down before a catastrophe. So, but they never found out who did that. The assailants were never identified or found or, you know, arrested. That's not the only place. There are other places in the United States that have had attacks like that. But more to the point, I mean, the sort of the broader picture of all this, I'm a founding member, together with a dearly departed, we miss him so much, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, founding member of his Congressional Task Force on National Security, specifically for focus on the EMP issue. EMP, electromagnetic pulse. Now, an EMP can be generated by the sun, and indeed it has been in the past, which shoots off solar flares, corona mass ejections, they're sometimes called CMEs. And those, I mean, space is humongous, right? those go out in all directions in the universe from the sun, or the galaxy anyway, the solar system, from the sun all the time. And some come towards the Earth, but around Earth is something called a magnetosphere, which acts as a protective layer against the electrified ions that shoot out of the sun. And we see the evidence of what happens when that magnetosphere gets pounded a little bit with the northern lights, right? If you've ever been up in, northern Canada or Alaska or up there in the Arctic area, circle area, or photos, you've seen pictures I have, those gorgeous lights in the night sky, that is a result of solar flares banging against our magnetosphere and kind of jiggling it. But if ever the solar flare is so powerful that it gets through the magnetosphere, then we're in trouble. And we're likewise in trouble from a hostile adversary nation launching a nuclear warhead in the upper atmosphere, 30 to 500 kilometers up, more or less. No, not a balloon. A balloon is too low. And a nuclear explosion like that, let's say from an enemy, Russia has this technology, North Korea has this technology, China does, I think we probably do too. If that explodes in the high atmosphere, what happens is that a super powerful stream of electrified ions, like from the sun, but from this nuclear explosion, comes coursing down to the Earth. And once again, if it gets through our magnetosphere, and it very well could with a nuclear explosion, our civilian electric grid comes in three parts. There's the eastern grid, the western grid, and the Texas grid, which is standalone. But of course, they're all connected, and we're connected to Canada, too. They're not protected. They're not secured. Over and over and over again, Peter tried, and we worked with Trent Franks when he was still in Congress from Arizona. We tried so hard to get Congress to pass, mandatory legislation that the public utilities, power utilities, would protect the grid, would take the steps to protect our electric grid against the sun or against an enemy hostile EMP attack. Could not get it done. The power and utilities companies just don't want to bother. They get funded. They're not going to alienate their donors. And our electric grid, our civilian electric grid, is not protected. Or at least not adequately protected. Now, in certain states, in certain places, like in South Carolina, former Ambassador Hank Cooper has been a leader on this, fantastic, with a project called the Lake Wiley Project, which is a local project to try to secure and better defend the local state electric grid. If we can't do it federally, nationwide, state by state. And there are other states like Colorado is one that are working on this to try to do it. They're going to try to do it locally because at the federal level, it's not happening. But that's where we are right now.
So on election night in 2019, when the voting actually stopped being counted and everyone took a several-hour break, I thought the election was in pretty good...
you mean 2021? I mean 2020?
For 2020, yes.
Yeah.
I thought the election was in control, and I woke up the next morning to find out that we had elected a bunch of traitors to run our government. Yeah. I have a two-part question. First of all, do you think there will be an election?
Yes,
this year?
I do.
Second of all, do you think it will be an honest and fair election?
Yes and no. Obviously, there will be, as there always is, attempts at cheating and fraud, which was massive back in 2020. But I think people, meaning in local jurisdictions as well as at the federal level, and there's new leadership, as you probably know, at the Republican GOP now. They've learned a lot over the last 4 years. And the same things that happened back 4 years ago, I don't think will happen again, but what else are they going to think of? And of course, they will try to think of something because at the moment, you know, it looks pretty dismal for the other side. And they know that if Donald Trump gets back in office, you know, this time he is going to clean house, and that means them. So they're going to fight tooth and nail, and I don't even know what to expect, but I do think this will be a very tumultuous, chaotic year on our streets. I think that the old Antifa groups, BLM kind of doesn't really exist anymore, but sort of does. They will join forces with the Islamic jihadis, again, red-green axis, or even red-black-green axis, if you will. Our streets are going to explode. That's going to happen. But again, that's why I keep going back to local jurisdictions, local law enforcement, especially the sheriff's departments, because they've got to be aware of what's coming up and they've got to be prepared for it. And hopefully, a lot of the mistakes of the past will be avoided this time. Can only hope. Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for being with us. Maybe I'll give you a chance to end on a more upbeat note.
Okay. Thank you.
Two things I wanted to ask you about. One is, I think I would imagine most you and maybe others in your position being in the CIA are shocked that after 3 years, I think, or 2 years plus, that the Russian army has not been able to advance in Ukraine when, for example, our army was in Baghdad in days, or in Kuwait in days, or Grenada in hours, and they continue to be bogged down. And is that a shock?
No, not a shock at all.
And the second
No.
question is,
No.
a lot of demographers are talking about the Chinese population perhaps as a legacy
It's
of
going
their,
off the cliff.
yes,
Off a
a
cliff.
billion people by 2100, which is 1 out of 7 people on Earth.
Under a billion. I mean, under a billion.
We'll
Very
drop.
likely.
We'll go from 1.4 to 0.4.
They don't even have that now.
Yeah, and so I just want to know what your thoughts were in terms of how that, when you look at the U.S., we
Yeah.
don't have that issue, how that might impact the world as we
Okay.
go forward.
So the first part of that is, how and why did Putin and the Kremlin, how did they miscalculate their invasion of Ukraine, which in fact, of course, began back in 2014 during, a prior administration. That's when they first invaded the Donbass, that eastern strip of the two oblasts, Luhansk and Donetsk, oblast provinces, maybe you might call them, of eastern Ukraine. That was when the first invasion took place. The Ukrainians have been fighting for their country for 10 years now. For 10 years, they've been fighting off the Russian army. Now, yes, they've gotten a lot of help. I don't think people realize how much assistance is coming out of Europe and out of NATO. If you go online, you can look up at certain websites. Per GDP, you know where the United States comes in terms of assistance to Ukraine? Just a wild guess. About 13 or 14. Yes, per GDP, okay, per GDP, we are 13th or 14th in terms of assistance. Why? Because the European countries, especially the ones on the border, the Baltics we've mentioned before, not exactly on the border, but pretty close. Why did Finland and Sweden just join NATO? I mean, they know what's coming. And then go on down, Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. They all know that they're next if we don't stop the Russian army at the Ukrainian border. And so they are donating incredible amounts of their per their GDP, way more than we ever have. But because we're bigger, our GDP is bigger, and so we have provided a lot of the materiel, weapons and ammunition that the Ukrainians need. I don't know if people know exactly how that works. We're not sending over to Ukraine shrink-wrapped $100 bills on pallets, okay? We only do that for the mullahs and the Taliban. We don't do it for Ukraine. What happens with Ukraine is that Congress appropriates a certain amount of money on a continuing basis, multiple times. And then U.S. companies like Raytheon or Boeing or Martin Marietta or our defense firms, right? They go to the shopping list, as it were, from Ukraine and said, we can provide this, this, and this. And they send that equipment, ammunition, to Ukraine. U.S. jobs, U.S. companies. Then those companies go to Congress with their bills of lading and say, look, we sent them this, this, and this, and Congress pays the American companies for what they just sent over there. That's how that works. People don't realize, I think, that. But, you know, to the other, I mean, the more basic issue, Ukrainians will fight with pitchforks if they have to stay free. They will not give up. Do you know what the Holodomor was? Anybody ever hear that? Holodomor. Holodomor is a Russian or Ukrainian, the languages are pretty close, word that basically means, Holod is cold in Russia, and mor is kind of a derivative of the word for death or killing. So cold, killing, cold death. Back in 1932, when Stalin ruled the Soviet Union, he wanted to collectivize the Ukrainian kulaks. Kulaks are farmers. And you probably know Ukraine is one of the bread baskets of the world, especially grains, wheat, barley, and other things that they supply to countries that really, really need it, that aren't able to grow their own. For example, in northern Africa, think of Algeria, Libya, Egypt, on down, Ethiopia, Somalia, probably Sudan too. They import the vast majority of their food needs. They can't grow it or enough of it. And so Ukraine exports not only that, but also seed oils, which are used for, well, all kinds of things, cooking. And they're one of the top world producers of seed oils and of grains. Countries will starve if those supplies don't get to them. Because other countries, even like South America, Argentina is a breadbasket, we are, other places are too, but it wouldn't be enough. So when Russia, well, when the Soviet Union broke up, okay, in 1991, under international law says that the constituent parts of the entity that just broke up, in this case the Soviet Union, they go independent as they were within the whole, if you can understand. So the Soviet Union was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? That's what USSR is. and when the countries broke away, you had the 5 Central Asian republics, for example, you know, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. They broke away as republics and now independent countries. Go to the east, go to the west, and when Ukraine broke away from the Soviet Union, it broke away with Crimea. We can talk about where Crimea's history another time, but it broke away and became an independent entity recognized by the United Nations, just like all the other former republics of the Soviet Union were so recognized by the United Nations. Independent country. And this was agreed to at the international level. Well, you remember what I said about Putin. It's the worst disaster of his entire life. He has vowed to put the Russian Empire back together again, if he can. And so he wants to erase, essentially, the nationhood, the national identity of the Ukrainian people. You might know that Russia itself, historically, Russia itself was founded in a place called Kievan Rus. Russia was founded in Kiev. Russia didn't exist before Kievan Rus, and that's back around 900s or so. And there was a king, Vladimir of Rus, kind of a namesake, I guess, maybe, who took his country not just to be the cradle of Slavic nationhood and civilization, but also converted to Christianity. And when he converted to Christianity, the way of the times was the whole people converted too. They had been pagan before that. They all converted to Christianity at that time. And then that was carried over. Remember, or maybe you might remember I guess not apostles, but missionaries, maybe you would say, Cyril and Methodius. Cyril and Methodius were Byzantines. Of the Byzantine Orthodox Church, they were from what is today Macedonia. And what they did is translated the Bible into Cyrillic. Cyrillic comes from the name Cyril. He gave his name to the language, Cyril and his brother Methodius. And they brought this up through all what are today the Slavic countries of Eastern Europe and on up, Ukraine and Russia itself. Well, Ukraine had its own independent Christian Orthodox identity from the 900s. And they've been invaded multiple times, torn apart. The Lithuanians invaded them, the Poles invaded them, the Germans invaded them, and obviously the Russians invaded them. But they never lost their sense of nationhood as a people, distinct from Russia, distinct from Russians, no matter what Putin wants to claim. And so that's why I'm saying that they will fight with pitchforks. If they've got nothing else left, they will send the grandmas, the grandpas, and the 15-year-olds out there with pitchforks. They will never, ever give up their nationhood again because of the Holodomor in particular, which I got off that topic. The Holodomor in 1932, when Stalin wanted to collectivize the kulaks, the farmers, they didn't want to be collectivized. They wanted independent, separate, ownership of their farms. And so what Stalin did is sent his goons in to grab all the food, all the crops, all the animals, the cows, the pigs, the chickens, the everything, and stripped it out of Ukraine just before the freezing cold winter of 1932. We don't know the numbers exactly, but millions of Ukrainians died of starvation because of that in the cold. And it wasn't just one winter, it went into the following year, 33, and the effects onward even after that. That is perhaps why we can understand a little bit, maybe, why when the Germans invaded Ukraine in World War II, they looked at them as liberators. Liberators from Stalin, who had murdered 5, 6, 7, we don't even know, million by starvation. That's why they looked to the Germans for liberation. Not because they particularly loved, Hitler, although, yes, there were, Jewish pogroms. I've got rabbi friends who tell me there were pogroms. There was Jew hatred in Ukraine, absolutely. Not so much today, of course. Zelensky himself is a Jew, as you probably know. But in any case, so that's kind of why Ukraine is fighting for its liberty, but why it's important to us to make sure that they survive is because of the Westphalian nation-state system. If we value, and I do, and I expect you do too, if we value that sovereign nation-state system, we want it to survive. We don't want the world to be, a wasteland of rampaging warlords who cross borders wherever and whenever they feel like it and slaughter people and kidnap their children. There's over 19,000 Ukrainian children kidnapped into Russia. People are over there trying to save them, trying to rescue them with some success, but yeah, thousands. And that's in addition to all the slaughter. So, they will fight forever to be free. They've done it before. Again, I said the Lithuanians, the Poles, the Germans, and now the Russians. They will fight. And we need to help them because we value the sovereign nation-state system because we're a part of it. And that means our southern border as much as it means their southern, or their eastern border. Anyway, very long answer, but you're waiting here for another question.
Yes, with all the military age young men coming in to the United States over the border, like Chinese and others, will there be a signal given where all of these military age men will rise up and
Well, what are they doing here?
fight?
You know, why are they here? Why are they here in the first place if they don't have malign, nefarious intentions? I think 2024 is going to be 2020 on steroids. Again, why it's so important for local level law enforcement and we, the people, citizens of these counties, collaborate, work with our local law enforcement.
Will this happen, though, before the election?
Oh, I think very much so, yes. Yeah, that's their time, that's their window to cause chaos. Yeah. I hope it's not true. I hope I'm wrong. We shall see. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Wow. Wow. Absolutely. Good point. Thank you for the story. All right. I think maybe that's the questions.
Have a drink of water, you deserve it.
It's about half gone.
Okay. Claire, we really appreciate you being here and your very thorough knowledge of all the bad guys out there is amazing. And we would like to give you this little plaque, which is made by a veteran-owned company here in Southern Pines. It's called the Heritage Flag Company. And it says, to Clare Lopez, James E. Holshouser Jr. Speaker Series 3/18/2024.
Oh, that is fantastic.
And on the back, it says, thank you for your courage in speaking thank you for your courage in speaking the truth.
Oh, that's good. Let me hold it up. That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everybody, for coming.